Thank you very much for the word, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues behind the screens. Let me welcome you to the debate on the Digital Market Act, which is organized by the SME Europe. As was mentioned, my name is Marek Degro and I'm political advisor to Mr. Stefanec. Digital Market Act is considered to be one of the key files for this election period in the European Parliament. And so there is a big discussion about, and from many perspectives, how the big digital platforms should be regulated, what should be banned as an unfair practice, and how to regulate this new digital market, which is developing very fast. So we have many different perspectives, many different alternatives, and many different expectations on how this situation should be developing. So, spectacularly in this time when we know that we already know the position of the Committee of Internal Market, which was elected last month, and we are still ahead of the election in the Parliament. So there are still some possibilities to discuss how the final position of the Parliament will be put into the trilogues with the French presidency. I'm very happy that today I can welcome 5 very distinguished and professional speakers, which will offer our viewers their position and views from the different perspectives on this file during the upcoming 1 hour and 15 minutes. I would like to encourage our attendees, if they have any question during the whole debate about this topic, feel free and do not hesitate to put your questions into the Q&A session or into the chat. So first of all, let me introduce and give the floor to the President of SME Europe and a member of the European Parliament, which is member of the Committee for Internal Market, ITRE and IDA, Mr. Ivan Stefanec. The floor is yours, and we are looking forward to your point of view about the DMA file.
Thank you very much, Marek. Good morning, everybody. I really do believe that DMA file is the most important legislation which we approve not only at IMCO committee, but in the whole European Parliament nowadays, because we desperately needed this legislation. As you have mentioned already, the file has been approved by IMCO committee, but we are waiting for approval by plenary. We expect that it will be done on December 15 in Strasbourg, actually next week. We were looking for having a stable, simple, and fair legislation in this field, which was very, very necessary. And this file actually implemented first time ex ante regulation, so very clear conditions for all the players on the market. So I think it's important also to highlight that by this file, we guaranteed that there is no fragmentation of the market. So we have the same rules on the European market. This is very, very important, particularly from the point of view of small and medium entrepreneurs. What is going to be changed? So first change, very important one, is to qualify which company is the gatekeeper. So gatekeeper will be the company doing business in at least 3 EU countries and have at least 45 million monthly end users, as well as more than 10,000 business users. So this is the first important change. Secondly, we empowered the Commission to impose so-called structural or behavioral remedies where gatekeepers have engaged in systematic non-compliance. So approved text foresees in particular the possibility for the Commission to restrict gatekeepers from making acquisition in areas relevant to the DMA. So I think this is a very important point that we empower the European Commission also to act against so-called killer acquisitions on the market. Thirdly, our Intermarket Committee MEPs approved that DMA should ensure adequate arrangements to enable whistleblowers to alert competent authorities to actual or potential infringement to this regulation and to protect from their retaliation. Next change is also related to so-called targeted advertising. There was, I have to say, a very, very rich discussion, a lot of lobbying from many sides. From my point of view, the compromise is a good one because we allowed at least targeted advertising for SMEs. For SMEs, it is very important tool to be known, to promote their goods and services. So there is also the possibility for SMEs to use targeted advertising according to this final wording. Last but not least, very important point is from interoperability perspective, which is very important also for end users, not only for SMEs, but also for all the consumers, that they will have the choice to use, for example, Messenger, and the platforms will be not allowed to push only for one kind of communication. So I think it will create very important competition on the market, which is very necessary also for SMEs. From procedure point of view, I'm positive that after the approval at IMCO committee, it will be approved at plenary, as I said, and we are in close touch with not only current Slovenian presidency, but also with coming French presidency. So it means that French presidency is prepared to approve it. There was also discussion between Commission, Parliament and Council already. So it gives me the hope that this file will be approved in trialogue by French presidency at the beginning of next year. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for your introductory remarks, and hope that it will be completed very soon and quickly. Let's hope it will be done like this. And of course, as you mentioned, keeping in mind the protection of small and medium enterprises, which are representing the backbone of the European economy. Let's go down to the debate. The first of our speaker, Mr. Christian Rusche, senior economist for industrial organization and competition from the German Economic Institute in Kolin. How would you describe the current proposal from the IMCO, and what do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of this proposal?
Thank you very much for this introduction. As you said, my name is Christian Rusche and I'm from the German think tank. The English name is German Economic Institute. And I must confess that I think I also was the cause for this DMA, because we also already did an analytical paper for the online observatory of the European Union. And this especially was on these app stores and on online retail sales. So, and we found problems there, and also it was highlighted there that Europe is a big market, an important market, but we have problems in completing the digital market, and therefore big platforms from the US and from Asia, they come here, and we are lacking some own of these big players, and therefore I saw the need for a rule to set, for a regulation that set rules for these big players joining here to have a level playing field in the European Union. And I also saw the problem, especially when I see the German position. We started with an own regulation in the 10th Amendment for the Act against problems with competition, where we have some kind of DMA on national level. And therefore I saw the need on European level to introduce such rules. So, and I also participated in this consultation for this DMA, and in the consultation, from my perspective, having a tool that can be used without infringement is a little bit problematic from my side. But when I saw the proposal of the Commission, I was completely fine with that. So what is a gatekeeper? And also the rules in Article 5 and 6, they come from infringements, lawsuits, especially, for example, this best price clauses, or the problems we saw with the Apple App Store in our analytical paper. So all these points there, I was completely fine with that. So I think that's a very good proposal. And when I see at the IMCO changes or the proposed changes, I think also it gained again, so it got even better from my perspective. But I have to say we have some discussions on the definition on gatekeepers in the German Economic Institute. So what my colleagues see is that they want to have, as proposed by Mr. Schwab, that we have at least some kind of networks there that is reinforcing itself. So we have at least two core service core services, right? That was proposed by Mr. Schwab, so that are reinforcing each other. That was some kind of that, like network effects and network and that reinforce each other. But that was not my point of view, because even if you have one service, one core service, you can also have negative influences on competition and also on the SMEs on your platform. So I'm completely fine with that. And what I also like in the proposal of the IMCO is that they, for example, they stress that non-commercial proposals are not considered in this as a core service. That's a good point from my point of view. What I also like is that they introduce smart home devices, and also, I guess, as a consequence of the Google Fitbit case, they also included these health devices there. So I also like this introduction. And what I also saw, and what is a really good point, is also mentioned by Mr. Stefanec, is that we have this this tool that we have mergers and acquisitions to be forbidden by these big platforms. And what we see is the 5 biggest platforms, they had 400 and 566 acquisitions that were mentioned in some reports for the US and for Great Britain. And they're doing, they are growing using mergers and acquisitions, and they also use killer acquisitions. That was stated in this report, and therefore this tool to prevent or to forbid this mergers and acquisitions, that is an important step from my point of view. So, and there was also the news for Great Britain that they that Facebook has to revert in merger and acquisition. I don't know whether this could happen with the DMA, but maybe this is also a thing for the near future. So, so that is the points I really like. I also wanted to say something about what I think about the complaint mechanism they were added, and also the compliance functions. That's also good points, and also the proposed annex to calculate the numbers. What may be debatable, where we can discuss, is, for example, the rise in the thresholds for the EU turnover and market capitalization. So in the proposal for the EU, there was, I guess, 65 billion euro market cap, and now in the IMCO report we have 80. So the question is, does this change anything? And I have even found the case where this is possible. So when we have a look at booking.com, it has now a market capitalization of around 77 billion euro. So with the proposal of the EU, this would be included. With the IMCO report, we would have not included that now. So that's maybe a point we can discuss about. I have no preference from my perspective, but that's a thing we should consider. And when we have looking at booking, we also have to consider, and maybe a thing that could be stressed more in this proposal, is that we have gatekeepers when their position is not contestable. And I'm not sure whether booking is such a market. I guess this position may be contestable. And another, or the last point I want to stress, or that could be debated, where we could discuss on, is the fines that were increased. So in the proposal for the EU, we have a maximum fine of 10% of global turnover. And now in the IMCO report, we have a minimum of 4% and a maximum of 20% of turnover. And since turnover is not the profit, that maybe I have the feeling maybe it's a little bit too high, but for platforms where we have these large economies of scale and where we also have not really big real investments, so we have more or less intangible assets. This is maybe a thing I could understand, but I still guess it might be a little bit too high. So, but in the end, I guess even with the IMCO report, this proposal even gained and got even better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your words. You ran through the important message that the completing digital market is one of the key tasks for the European Union to set up the proper rules for big companies from abroad, but also for the Europeans to know and define the playing field. How to work and with the customers and against each other, about forbidding the killers acquisitions, like it's called, not to protect the small players, and then of course about the compliance function. And what was interesting also is the level of fines. If there is a range, of course it depends on the Commission how high fine they will choose for the company. The 20% might be really threat for the company, but it will depend on the decision of the decision-making body. As you were discussing the issue of booking and whether to include or not, depending on the capitalization and many other aspects, this might be also a very interesting starting point for our another speaker, Mr. Alexis Varavka, Head of Digital and Competitiveness from the Independent Retail, who before working also for the Hotrec sector, and from their perspective, there were many voices of including such platforms as booking under the DMA scope, but now I will give the floor to you, and happy to listen your point of view on this file.
Thank you very much, Marek. As you mentioned, my previous capacities, I was working for the hospitality sector, and I know that my former colleagues have rather strong views on including a company like Booking.com in the scope of the DMA, because it's certainly representing like over 60 or 65% market share on their specific online information market. So, but I'm not here to represent Hotrec anymore. And I'm actually working for Independent Retail Europe, as you mentioned earlier now. So Independent Retail Europe is the European association that represents groups of independent retailers. Our association represents 23 groups of independent retailers and their national associations, who collectively provide about 6.6 million jobs to a little bit less than 400,000 independent retailers, mostly SME retailers. And I will just start by saying that I think that like many SMEs, independent retailers have complaints for years about some questionable practices from a very few large online platforms who are both a dominant service provider and sometimes at the same time competitor on the same market. So we certainly welcome the Digital Markets Act and its intention to restore competition online. But at the same time, it's also important to preserve innovation and growth. And that's why the DMA has to be, we think, focused and proportionate. So I will speak about 3 points in particular in my intervention. First of all, the scope, then a brief word on the list of obligations under Article 5 and 6, and then a final word on targeted advertising that was already mentioned by MEP Stefanec. So first, the scope. We certainly see positive developments in the text proposed by the IMCO committee. First of all, very important, the inclusion of virtual assistants in the scope of the DMA. That will certainly make the DMA future-proof. Virtual assistants are indeed increasingly becoming a major gateway between retailers and consumer. And it's a market which is dominated by very, very few providers. Actually, some of them being already covered by the DMA for some of their other services. You see the importance to make sure that this is included in the scope. A second positive aspect that we see in the IMCO report on DMA is about the quantitative thresholds. First of all, proportionality is key. So, and we have to ensure that DMA keep being focused on the real gatekeepers. So the quantitative thresholds are extremely important to define correctly, and we certainly welcome the proposal of the IMCO to keep the thresholds for the number of business users and the number of end users as they were proposed by the Commission. That will clearly help to focus the effort. And we do not see negatively the slight raise in the thresholds, because as I said, it's important to ensure that the 5, 6, 7, it's not the exact number, but we keep a DMA focused on a very few sets of real gatekeepers to make sure that you can really enforce the rules correctly. So that's certainly a positive development from our point of view. I would raise still one criticism about how intermediation services are defined. It's a slight weakness in the DMA, but also in the DSA, because the definitions are interlinked in both files, because the definition overlooks the existence of internal closed platforms, whereby the platform provider and the business users, although they are formally separate legal entities, they are part of the same organizations operating under one common brand. And very often in this kind of closed internal settings, the business users are actually controlling the platform. So it's the reverse of what people think about when they think of platforms. And that's the typical example of the platforms which are operated by cooperative retail groups for their SME retailers. So we think that perhaps this widespread model should have deserved to be mentioned and excluded from the definition of intermediation services, because they are a different beast that cannot create a gatekeeper situation, because usually the users are controlling the platform in that case. Now on the list of do's and don'ts, the Article 5 and 6, we believe that in the specific context of digital markets, some of the obligations listed are extremely important to ensure that online gatekeepers cannot prevent SME retailers from competing online. I will mention two examples that we certainly welcome. First of all, the prohibition for gatekeepers to use the non-public data of their business users to compete against them, but also the prohibition of using clauses preventing business users to charge lower prices on other channels. These are certainly prohibitions that are to be welcomed. They are being supported by the IMCO, and we welcome that move. We nevertheless see one drawback with the list of articles in Article 5 and 6. It's the impossibility to show on a case-by-case basis that in a specific market context, some of the practice may occasionally have a pro-competitive effect, offsetting any harm. This is a lack of recognition that may have some negative impact on the long run. Maybe that deserves some attention. Just to give you a simple example, both the EU expert group on the platform observatory and the EU high-level panel of economic experts on platform issues recognize that there are some potential benefits for self-referencing and anti-steering mechanism in specific market contexts. And fortunately, that is not recognized by Article 5 and 6, these occasional benefits. And I will conclude with a few words on targeted advertising, mentioned earlier in the introduction. There were many discussions in the European Parliament on the issue, but I would like to stress once more that targeted ad is necessary for SME retailers to reach potential new customers in a cost-efficient manner, and I insist on the cost-efficient manner. Banning its use would have certainly made it difficult for SME retailers to enter new markets or markets which are already dominated by very large companies. So the compromise that was found in the DMA on targeted is certainly a good one. So to conclude, we believe that DMA is certainly going to be a major instrument to support competition online. We welcome the IMCO approach on the quantity thresholds, the willingness to include virtual assistants, and the compromise on targeted ads, as well as many of the obligations under Article 5 and 6. Just two drawbacks, as I mentioned. The definition of intermediation services that overlook the existence of closed platforms, and the absence of the possibility to recognize that for some of the obligations under Article 5 and 6, occasionally there may be some pro-competitive benefits that may justify a case-by-case approach. That's probably something that would have deserved to be included and that would have made the DMA a bit more effective, though it's a good piece of legislation. So thanks very much, and I look forward for a good discussion.
Thank you very much for your words and wrapping up. I take away one interesting suggestions, maybe to exclude internal closed platforms, which, as you mentioned, are mostly controlled by users, so they are not the gatekeepers. This is something maybe what should be discussed even further, and that's a very interesting remark. Thank you very much for this comments. So now it's my pleasure to give the floor to our third speaker. It's Mr. Nicolo Ciuri, advisor from the competitiveness and commercial relations from the Eurocommerce. Mr. Ciuri, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marek, and good morning, everyone. My name is Nicolo Ciuri. I'm advisor for commercial relations and competition policy at Eurocommerce. Eurocommerce is the European Federation for Retail and Wholesale. Our members include national commerce federations from 31 countries, so not just the EU, plus around 30 leading retailers and wholesalers, and federations representing specific sectors of commerce, such as, for instance, e-commerce. For us, obviously, the objective of ensuring fair competition in a digital environment is very important. Digitalization is creating new opportunities and driving transformational change through increased competition, transparency, efficiency. We know that consumers are now used to the digital environment and the digital shopping experience. And this, of course, is a trend that has existed for many years, but has been accelerated enormously by the COVID-19 pandemic. Some recent data from Germany, from the German Retail Association, half of sales in Germany now have some kind of digital element. These are data from Germany, but they resonate across the EU. So in the retail and wholesale ecosystem, as I said, digital is important. It increases choice, efficiency, helps create new jobs, including in rural areas and for SMEs. So the way we view the Digital Markets Act is mainly from a marketplace point of view. And we recognize the importance of marketplaces today to increase visibility, access the market, and to help business users reach new customers in a digital world, including, particularly important for SMEs, which might at times lack the resources to go online and sell online independently. So some specific, comments on the DMA and on the IMCO position after this introduction. It is very important that the DMA provides a framework that maintains incentives to invest in marketplaces in Europe, allows them to grow, and creates a regulatory framework which is characterized by legal certainty, predictability for those falling under the scope, but also for emerging platforms that are not in scope now, but might be at some point. Now, some specific thoughts on the IMCO report, on the IMCO opinion, some positive thoughts, and perhaps some points where further clarifications is needed, or some further thoughts are necessary. On enforcement, as I said, legal certainty is important, and as previous speakers have said, it is key to avoid fragmentation of the internal market. This is why we have the DMA. We know that the DMA legal basis is internal market legislation harmonization. So the DMA should provide a maximum level of harmonization. And for this reason, it is very welcome that the IMCO committee is aware of this and has included specific references in the recitals to the need, and in Article 1 of the DMA, to the need to avoid market fragmentation. They have also kept this in mind when drafting the provisions on collaboration between national competent authorities and the European Commission, and creating this new high-level group of digital regulators, which will allow all the different authorities and the Commission to coordinate as I said, to avoid, to ensure a consistent approach throughout Europe. Of course, it is important for national authorities to have a role, and in the current IMCO position, they will have the role of monitoring compliance, collecting complaints. That is particularly positive for SMEs. National competent authorities might be closer to the ground, so to say, in collecting complaints and monitoring how compliance is going. So this is very positive. Perhaps some words on the scope and on the practices. I agree with previous speakers. It is, in terms of the quantitative criteria, the DMA should be focused on a limited number of gatekeepers. And in terms of the practices, it is also important to ensure that there is a degree of tailoring possible, because we know that the practices from Article 5 and 6 arise from previous decisions of the court or investigations by the Commission, which sometimes took place in very specific contexts. But now here they are giving a wider application. So that is important. It is important to have further detail in Article 7, for instance, on the regulatory dialogue between the gatekeeper, third parties, which of course must include SMEs, and the Commission, as to how a specific provision will be applied. And also, we see there is a new amendment inserted, I think it's Article 10(1)(a), where the Commission has the power to specify the extent to which an obligation applies to a certain core platform service. And this is helpful, again, to ensure some degree of tailoring, and also, as Alexis was saying, there are some practices that can have pro-competitive effects, for instance, self-preferencing. So these can all be instruments in which this can be verified. Perhaps some issues to give some further thoughts on. The definition of the active user. We support what IMCO has done in defining active user per core platform service, because obviously, an active user of a social media platform is not the same as a search engine or a marketplace. So we do support the definition per user. Currently, the definition for marketplaces includes sort of clicking, scrolling, all sorts of activity on a marketplace. We believe that perhaps this should be limited to purchasing. So to be a user, an end user to a marketplace, this should be based on some kind of monetary transaction, because e-commerce is characterized by a strong degree of multi-homing. Users are not locked in unless they have a subscription. And so they have a variety of choices that are free to switch to other marketplaces within seconds. Perhaps, and we know that some countries within the Council are giving some further thoughts about this. Can be, an issue for discussion. And to wrap up, perhaps on targeted advertising, we think that a good compromise was found in the DMA. Many arguments were made against a total ban on targeted advertising, which could have also been to the detriment of SMEs. So yeah, this the current compromise was a good one. So yeah, just to quickly wrap up, as I said, positive, very positive compromises on enforcement, on the scope, on some of the practices, and perhaps, as I said, the last two final points for further thoughts, some of the definitions, and perhaps some further consideration of further tailoring for the DMA. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your perspective from the view of marketplaces. And now the last speaker on our list is Mr. Christoph Riedmann, Policy Advisor for Digital Policy from the Euro Chambers. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marek. As you mentioned, my name is Christoph Riedmann. I'm Digital Policy Advisor for Euro Chambers. Eurochambers is the umbrella organization of the European Chambers of Commerce and Industry. We represent about 20 million companies in 40 European countries. So you see, of course, our majority is from EU countries, but we really consider ourselves a pan-European organization. And when we look at proposals like the DMA, we think of the marketplace. Is the marketplace functioning? Is it a place where big companies, small companies, production company, trading companies, service companies, or platforms can have a proper living and can, so to say, where the market serves as a place to satisfy the demands of consumers and the demands of those companies who buy from other companies. So that was our perspective when we looked at the DMA as well, and where of course we looked at what doesn't work and what could go better. And of course the decisive thing about the DMA was to have a regulation ex ante, and so to say, to enable the authorities to, for the first time, get something sorted out before the damage is done. Because the main problem, as we saw it until now in the digital world, was that just the digital markets developed too fast to be regulatable by competition authorities within time before the damage is done. So that was our primary concern. We of course introduced or suggested some other things to change as well. From what I can now say, when I look at the proposal as it stands now, be it from the Parliament report, be it from the general approach of the Council, I think we can say the content is more or less okay now. And we will see, for example, you mentioned before, Christian, you mentioned Booking.com. If you walk out on the street and ask an average person, is Booking.com a gatekeeper? Most people would probably say yes, of course. So if it now falls out of the scope, then we have to assume that the scope is probably a bit too high. So there are a few things that probably still need some more fine-tuning, but more or less it's okay. What concerns us at this moment now, or where we say this is what should be in the focus next, is first keep it simple and think of those to whom it should give a right. So that is the small business. Is this complex piece of legislation now made in a way that the small company can go to the platform and say, hey, I know my rights, you may not do this. I'm a bit doubtful there, and probably that will be part of the implementation process to make that happen. And the second big aspect for me is the speed aspect. As I said before, the big advantage is now to do something ex ante, so you don't need to wait as a competition authority till the damage is done. You can from the beginning look at it, and so to say, you can cope with the enormous dynamism of the internet and of digital marketplaces. The second thing that helped to accelerate processes is that, as we ask for, the notification periods for gatekeepers were shortened considerably, and also that the suspensions granted under Article 8 should now be reviewed every year. So that helps enormously to look at these things within time and not allow platforms to play the time card. The third, and for me the most decisive point is the application per se, and there I also see at the moment the biggest divide between what the Parliament asks for and what the Council asks for, namely how to make this best with a European authority that executes or national competence authorities. We always said we prefer a European executive body to be on the same level as the platforms, with a strong inclusion of the national competition authorities, that they can provide their expertise, they can do a good job in investigating on the market. But the main focus is that with all this consultation mechanism, you shouldn't be able to slow down the process. The application must go as far as possible in an as speedy way as possible. We would have liked there to have a certain business feedback mechanism built into, simply to make the legislator or the applicant, the competent authority, know better what's going on the market. I know that the EU legislators, they tend to look into the textbook and regulate that. Once it's adopted, they don't think of it anymore. It goes to application, and that's not their business anymore. That's the Commission who deals it. But I really, this is something that really I would like to ask the parliamentarians for at this stage. When you adopt this, when you go to the plenary to adopt it, please think of what's the best, easiest way to apply this and to make it really be applied in a speedy and efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution and remarks. As we have nearly half an hour, I would like to encourage once again our attendees to raise up the questions for our panelists. If you have anyone, there is one question already, but if you will feel free to say if you feel okay with replying to this or not. The question is that there are also some plans for secure networks like 6G or Wi-Fi 7 to be compiled with the GDPR regulation. It's maybe talking more about Wi-Fi, but it's still connected to the GDPR. I don't know if someone of you feel competent to try to reply to these questions, or we can leave it maybe to some other.
So maybe I can say some few words if you want. So the problem with 6, I can only say something to 6G. It's now in the standardization phase. So in the working groups, they're discussing how 6G should be look like. And 6G will, by design, have some data protection standards. That means that we have a secure communication over this network. But this does only to some extent relate to the GDPR. So the firms using 6G and the software for 6G, they must be compliant. 6G has the standards to protect only the data flows over the network, but the protection and what is done with the personal data, that is not in the scope of the regulation and the standardization of 6G now.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Now maybe I would like to ask my panelists, and we can set up the order. How do you feel to reply when we talk about this regulation for the digital market, and we know that there are cases of the European unicorns and the companies which are growing very fast. How do you see in the current position that this kind of regulation should slow down maybe, or become a treat for our unicorns or startups which are now trying to grow up? Most of them are now from Estonia, but also from other countries, and whether they should be affected and in which way, either mostly positive, but also if there are some negatives that can be followed by these companies at the end of the day, when this kind of regulation should be valid and should affect the growth and entrepreneurship of these companies? You know, who would like to react to this question as the first one?
Maybe a very general remark. I mean, the whole DMA and also the recent proposals, for example, when you think on that proposal that was around 3 years ago on the fairness of digital marketplaces, that had it in the name. It comes down to fairness. It comes down to a functioning marketplace. It comes down to one company not easily being able to push the other out just by size. So I think that should be the main focus of the DMA as well. I am not in this thinking that with legislation per se we can create companies or can create company success. For example, when you think of the General Data Protection Regulation, some said if we create this data protection environment in Europe, then there will be so many companies that deal with data protection. They will all be European and they will then conquer the world. We have seen that doesn't fly, to be honest. So that won't work, but what will work and what is important for us, having a fair market, having a market where startups, grow new entrants, be they unicorns or smaller, can establish and can sell their ideas and their products.
Thank you. Mr. Rusche would like to react, or?
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe when I'm can handle it, I want you to show you a picture, and these are the valuation of the so-called unicorns. That means startups that have not an IPO and that had a valuation of more than $1 billion US dollars. And what we see, most of them are not from Europe, and we also see that platform unicorns have a higher valuation on average. And also, again, the most platform unicorns are not from Europe. So this is, again, the problem, as you mentioned. And what I see, what needs to be done and what's the problem there is, on the one hand, we have big foreign platforms and big foreign digital companies dealing on the market, maybe fighting against for market shares in Europe. And therefore, we need something like the DMA, but also the enforcement of the competition rules to set fair rules, to set a level playing field. But on the other hand, what is also needed and what can be seen from the fact that most of these foreign unicorns come from big single markets like the US or China, that we need to complete the digital market in Europe on the one hand, because this enables growth potential and also investments. And we might also have problems in this second phase of financing, not in the seed phase, in the first phase of startups and unicorns, but we have a lack of the big sums invested in the US, like 100 million or 1 billion in one firm. That's the second growth phase of these startups. So that's the thing I could say to this point.
Thank you for the reply. I don't know if any other speakers would like to reply and add some remarks. If not, then I could follow to Mr. Rusche remarks with the following question about how do you see the future when the DMA will start the implementation phase, that how it will be affected on a global level, and whether it can represent some standard for the global regulation, or to set up some global standards for the digital market. How do you see this?
So what we see, we have this new regulations enforced in China. We have the discussion on new regulations in the US. We have also in Great Britain the discussion on new regulation. And that seems to me that we all have on the whole world the need for new regulation on these big tech companies. They have too much influence on society and too much influence on the economy, and therefore we need this regulation. And what I think the DMA could really be a big step towards a regulation, because it sets clear-cut rules based on the cases we saw before, on the infringements we saw before, and therefore it could really make a big sign also to influence other regulations.
Would anyone other like to comment the implementation phase or the standards?
I mentioned it already during my main intervention. I mean, for me, for us, the decisive criteria is now to have these things implemented fast. Also, it's about showing companies that they have certain rights, and those rights are taken seriously by authorities, and then automatically they are taken seriously also by platforms. And then the market works, and then we have a concrete success story where we can show the digital market is not a Wild West market, but it's a regulated, proper market with rules, and you have rights.
Thank you very much. So now we should go for the last round of your remarks with the question like, what are your expectations for the future, for the upcoming year? Maybe what would you recommend as a takeaway from today's debate for the legislators, for the trialogues, and what do you expect that how should the debate be developed in the upcoming time that will protect the SMEs on one time and the customers, but on the other hand will present a proper and safe regulation which will be effective for our digital market. So Mr. Christian Rusche, the first floor is yours.
So the question is, when I understand you correctly, what will be the influence, right? Or
yes.
So what will be the consequences, especially for SMEs? And I think for Europe, we have the need for these big platforms, since there are now focal points for many users from the business side and from the user side, the consumer side, that we have interoperation, that they have the possibility to interoperate, because when I want to term it in one sentence, these platforms have now become to something like infrastructure. And when we have something like infrastructure, we need to have interoperability, and we also have the need for standards. And it is also a point I liked in the IMCO proposal that we have, I guess, recital 57 or so, that we need to have standards proposed and also based on the standardization organizations to be implemented. And this is a really good thing, because these are the infrastructure for the digital age, and therefore SMEs and consumers will benefit if we have interoperability and standards with these big platforms in the single market.
Thank you very much for your words. Now, Mr. Alexis Varavka.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, first expectations for the trilogue, and even after the trilogue, I think the key priority with this DMA will be enforcement. We will have a tool that's going to be rather effective, we think, to help and support SMEs and restore competition online, but it can only be as effective as enforcement is effective. So it has to be focused, the enforcement, on the very few gatekeepers that exist and are the prime target of this DMA. And that will certainly help to support a good competitive environment online. So that would be my first point. My second point is also to think about the difficulty that the closed platform I mentioned before sometimes may be ending up with if there's no in European legislation, that's the DMA, that's the DSA, but also future legislation on digital platform or on platforms. They have to maybe a little bit have a closer look at the different models and make sure that you really consider the diversity of the business model. I mentioned that the closed platform business model are not considered right now in the DMA and the DSA or to a certain extent. We certainly hope that this will be a good case for the future to really think more widely about the different business models if there is regulation. Yeah, one important aspect that I would like to mention, it was briefly touched upon by me and also by Nicolo for the Trilogue. Probably the provisions of the regulatory dialogue, they will be crucial because not every platform has the same business model. The obligations are kind of wide obligations based on a compilation of different competition case law of the past. It's going to be very important that the dialogue allow to tailor the obligations in their application for the platform that will have to apply them to make sure that when there are some efficiencies, you don't basically wipe them out completely, but at the same time that you clearly, truly address the real competitive issues that are faced on the market.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Nicolo Ciulli.
Yes, thank you. So expectations going into the trilogue. We know that some disagreements persist between in terms of the approach, for instance, to enforcement between the Council and the European Parliament. But we also recognize that the political will is there. So I suspect that this could be dealt with relatively quickly. We know that there are some sort of last-minute proposals, amendments that have been tabled separately from the IMCO opinion for next week's debate. They are focusing on concentrations, so something we touched earlier, killer acquisition. So those perhaps will be discussions that will also be addressed. And then, yeah, I think, as I said, disagreements can be resolved relatively quickly and sort of throughout the next year, then we can sort of have the whole framework ready. Of course, if the Commission is to be the sole enforcer, it needs to have the resources. And we know that a unit has already been created. But there needs to be clarity as to enforces the DMA within the Commission, DG Competition, DG Connect. Is there a role for other DGs as well? There will need to be guidelines by the Commission on a number of issues, such as fines, in involvement of other stakeholders, complaints. So there's still, I presume, more work that needs to be done to have a very clear, legally certain framework. But yeah, the political will is there. So I suspect that this can be dealt with pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thank you for these positive remarks, Mr. Christoph Riedman.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to also give a positive remark. For me, the DMA and also the DSA, in a way, they were big aha moments in how European legislation is done today. I just opened once more the original document. The proposal for the DMA was published on the 15th of December 2020. So it's not even 1 year old. If you think back to other more complex legislative projects in recent years, I mean, it took 2 years to be at the stage that we are today, and then the trilogues went from round to round. So transposed into the DMA, we would have an agreement sometime close to the next European elections. That's over. The European Parliament and the European institutions now see how dynamic the internet is, how quick you need a regulation, and the fact that we are this far advanced after only 1 year shows already that this was realized, and the political actors are willing to get this done in a quick way. So therefore, I'm very positive towards the trilogues on negotiations, and I can expect that there will be an agreement very soon. And also with this in mind, that the institutional environment for applying the DMA will be absolutely fit to purpose.
Thank you very much. This is really the fact that this file was negotiated very quickly, because we wanted to have it on the table as soon as possible, that we know that this market is developing very fast and quickly. But now one more question came from our auditorium, and when we are talking about the future and the effects of the file to the other regulations, maybe it's a really good question that is the DMA report, or will the DMA report also have an impact on the upcoming DSA report in IMCO, especially with regard to the targeted advertising? This is the question from our attendees. I don't know who would like to reply to this question, but what will be the impact on the DSA and targeted advertising? We know that the voting was postponed from tomorrow IMCO meeting to the later stage. So the last question for today for someone from you. Okay, well, we have now experts on the DMA, so the DSA is maybe this is something that can be discussed at the later stage. However, let me wrap it up. Today's meeting, I believe that for all the attendees, it was very useful and fruitful. I would like to thank very much for all of you to stay until the end of the debate. I would like to thank all the participants, all the speakers for their remarks and the contribution. It's really the file which will be discussed for the long time since now, and we believe that it will bring a balanced support for all the stakeholders from the SME sides, from the entrepreneur sides, and also from bring the security for the customers. I would like to thank especially Mr. Stefanec, who had covered this event and hosted it. Thanks to SME Europe for organizing this event, and wish you very nice day, and stay in contact for the upcoming updates, how the situation will be developed. Thank you and have a nice day.